On the early morning of August 30th, 1986 in Taipei, Taiwan, 3 policemen were patrolling Hejiang Road when they were suddenly stopped by a woman in a state of extreme panic. Her name was Li Lihua, and with a trembling voice, she informed the police that her in-laws had likely been murdered. What drove Lihua to such desperate measures as stopping a police car? To understand this story, we need to go back 12 hours. At 1:30 p.m. on August 29th, the day before the incident, Lihua and her husband Zhuang Wenhui called their parents to say they would visit. Wenhui's father answered the phone and, like any parent, was overjoyed to hear that his son and daughter-in-law were coming over. 3 hours later, at 4:30 p.m., when Wenhui and Lihua arrived, they found the iron gate locked from the inside. Despite repeatedly ringing the doorbell, there was no response. Wenhui began to feel uneasy. Just 3 hours ago, his father had cheerfully answered the phone, so why was the house suddenly empty? At that moment, he noticed a note on the door that read, "As the parents will be emigrating to Argentina the day after tomorrow, they needed to go south today to bid farewell to relatives and friends. We apologize for any inconvenience. Signed, Yun Hui." To understand the characters mentioned in this note and learn more about the case, let's look at the family background. The father mentioned in the note was Zhuang Shudu, age 68. He and his wife, Mrs. Kai, had 3 children. Their eldest son, who had already settled in Argentina. Their daughter, Zhuang Yueqing, married to Chen Yunhui, who left the note. And their youngest son, Zhuang Wenhui, married to Li Lihua, who stopped the police car. The Zhuang family was a wealthy merchant family. In their early years, Mr. and Mrs. Zhuang started with a small barbershop in Taipei, carefully saving their earnings. Later, they boldly invested in real estate around Hejiang Street. Fortune smiled upon them as this coincided with Taipei's urban expansion, causing the value of Mr. Zhuang's property investments to skyrocket within just a few years. By seizing this opportunity, the couple had built considerable wealth. Of their 3 children, the eldest son had chosen to settle in Argentina early on. Following his lead, their daughter and her husband Yunhui also established themselves in that distant country. Only the youngest son, Wenhui, and his wife remained in Taiwan to care for his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Zhuang lived at 131 Hejiang Street, which would later become the crime scene. By August 1986, Mr. and Mrs. Zhuang had also decided to emigrate to Argentina to reunite with their children and enjoy their retirement. Their son-in-law Yunhui made a special trip back from Argentina to help them with immigration procedures and accompany them on their journey. Learning that their parents would soon leave Taiwan for Argentina, Wenhui and his wife wanted to visit and help with the packing. Around 4 p.m. on August 29th, they arrived at 131 Hejiang Street, but were surprised to find the main door locked from inside. There was a note on the door, and oddly enough, while the handwriting was indeed Yunhui's, it stated that the parents had gone to South Taiwan to bid farewell to friends. This made Wenhui extremely suspicious. How could his parents suddenly leave when just 3 hours ago his father had been happily talking on the phone? His parents hadn't mentioned any plans to go south, and had even cheerfully said they would wait for the couple to come over for afternoon tea. His mother had specifically asked Lihua to take the longer route through Shilin to buy her favorite pork knuckles and steamed buns, so why would she suddenly change her plans? After waiting at the door for quite a while, the couple decided to find a nearby restaurant to rest. During this time, Wenhui couldn't settle his mind and kept calling home, hoping his parents had returned. Finally, at 10:30 p.m., someone answered the phone. But instead of his parents' familiar voices, it was his brother-in-law Yunhui on the line. He hastily said only, "The parents haven't returned yet," before hanging up abruptly. The brother-in-law's strange behavior made the couple even more uneasy. They hurriedly discussed returning to the house to check if anything was wrong. When they arrived back at the house, Wenhui rang the doorbell again. After a while, his brother-in-law appeared, inappropriately dressed in just a white tank top and shorts. With visible irritation, he snapped, "Why are you coming at this hour?" "I already told you the parents aren't home." The couple quickly explained they just wanted to see if they could help with anything. They went upstairs, and Yunhui didn't stop them from entering. In the living room, he sat down on the sofa, putting his feet up on the chair. Wenhui immediately sensed something was wrong. His brother-in-law's complexion was unusual, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked exhausted. More disturbing was the smell of blood in the room, and there were sticky stains on the furniture that looked like dried blood. Unable to contain himself, Wenhui asked, "What's that up there?" Without even looking, Yunhui immediately replied, "Just mosquito stains." Wenhui continued asking about his parents' whereabouts. "Did they really go south this afternoon? Why didn't they say anything beforehand?" Yunhui replied indifferently, "It was a last-minute decision. They specifically told me you would visit this afternoon, which is why I left the note." Then suddenly, as if unable to contain himself any longer, Yunhui abruptly changed the subject and began complaining about his in-laws. "The parents are so biased, always favoring the eldest son. Honestly, among all their sons and sons-in-law, who hasn't treated them well? Why don't we get any share of the assets? The eldest son already has plenty of money." The youngest son, Wenhui, was startled by this, but fortunately reacted quickly, going along with his brother-in-law's words. "Actually, I have issues with this too. Sure, they can go to Argentina, but why not leave me anything? What good is this old house to me? My business hasn't been doing well lately, and I've wanted to borrow money from them but couldn't even bring myself to ask. I sometimes wonder if they're going to Argentina just to avoid me." After Wenhui's comments, his brother-in-law became visibly excited, as if he'd found an ally. He continued, "I'm practically their son too, yet they guard against me like I'm a thief. You're their actual son, but what good has it done you? They'd rather run off to Argentina than live with you." The two men continued talking animatedly in the living room. But Wenhui knew very well in his heart, his parents weren't that kind of people. He was only playing along to avoid arousing his brother-in-law's suspicions. In fact, from the moment he entered the house, Wenhui had noticed things were off. His parents' sudden departure without notice, the locked door since afternoon, bloodstains on furniture, the lingering metallic smell that wouldn't dissipate, plus his brother-in-law's strange demeanor. All these signs told his instincts that something terrible had happened to his parents. Though terrified inside, Wenhui maintained a calm exterior, smiling and chatting with his brother-in-law as if everything was normal. He knew he absolutely couldn't risk making his brother-in-law suspicious. While the two men were engaged in conversation, Wenhui's wife Lihua excused herself to use the bathroom. What she saw there horrified her. Bloodstains remained in the tile grout. Though someone had clearly tried to clean up, they couldn't erase all traces of evidence. Moreover, her in-law's bedroom door was tightly locked, and the smell of blood grew stronger near the door. At this point, Lihua was certain that a murder had taken place in the house, and her in-laws had likely met a tragic fate. Though heartbroken, Lihua forced herself not to cry. She understood that if she confronted her brother-in-law now, both she and her husband could be in mortal danger. She wiped away her tears, composed herself, and returned to the living room. Over the next hour, she secretly traced letters on her husband's thigh with her finger to communicate. Fortunately, the couple knew each other well enough that Wenhui understood his suspicions were correct. Something terrible had happened to his parents. During this time, brother-in-law Yunhui repeatedly suggested, "It's so hot today. Why don't you two take a shower?" By now the couple understood. He might be trying to separate them to make them vulnerable. So they both politely declined and insisted on staying in the living room to chat. The three of them continued like this for over 4 hours until 4 a.m. the next morning. The brother-in-law had smoked nearly half a pack of cigarettes. At this point, Lihua suddenly stood up, pretending everything was normal, and said, "You shouldn't smoke so much. Let me clean up this mess. Look at all these cigarette butts scattered around." She then started tidying up. Soon after, she took a carefully tied garbage bag and walked toward the stairs, saying she was going down to throw out the trash. Lihua chose this moment because she knew garbage collectors would come around 4 a.m., and she had planned to ask either them or any passers-by to help call the police. By coincidence, When she reached the street corner, she saw a garbage truck slowly approaching. But what she hadn't expected was that there was a police patrol car following behind the garbage truck. Li Hua immediately dropped the garbage bag and ran to stop the police car. After the police got out of their car, Li Hua told them everything she had discovered. The three officers immediately followed her to 131 Hejiang Street and quickly went up to the second floor. In the living room, Yunhui faced the police without showing any sign of panic, remaining calmly seated on the sofa. However, based on their professional instincts, the three officers immediately noticed an unusual metallic smell in the house. Two officers began checking the upper and lower floors for anything suspicious, while the third officer stayed in the living room to watch Yunhui. Meanwhile, Wenhui and Li Hua went to his parents' master bedroom door. Wenhui kicked the door hard several times, but it wouldn't budge. With no other choice, he helped his wife climb through the small window into the room. Soon after, Li Hua managed to open the door from inside. When they entered the master bedroom, they found 6 pieces of luggage. Wenhui's heart was pounding as he slowly unzipped one of the bags and saw blood-soaked body parts. The emotions he had been suppressing suddenly erupted, and he screamed in horror. "Murder!" This heart-wrenching scream caught the attention of all three officers. They rushed over, urging Wenhui not to disturb the crime scene. But then a problem arose. All three officers were now in the bedroom, so who was watching the brother-in-law in the living room? When two officers suddenly remembered this and rushed back to the living room, the sofa was empty. Indeed, the suspect had escaped right under their noses. The police headquarters quickly received the report. A large number of officers were dispatched to secure the crime scene. Crime scene investigators, prosecutors, and forensic experts arrived one after another. As they opened the bags one by one, they discovered the killer had methodically sorted the victim's body parts. 2 heads in one bag, 4 hands in another bag, feet and internal organs sorted into different bags. Besides the 6 pieces of luggage, they found an array of weapons in the master bedroom, including a half-moon-shaped cleaver, fruit knives, scissors, serrated knives, and other tools. The initial investigation results came quickly. Mr. Shudu was first struck in the head with a blunt object, then stabbed in the chest. Mrs. Zhuang's cause of death was a stab wound to the heart. What puzzled the police was that the crime scene showed no signs of a violent struggle. Neighbors also reported hearing no unusual sounds. What surprised the forensic experts was that all body parts had been precisely cut at the joints. Both the weapons used and the method of dismemberment suggested the work of someone with butcher-like skills. After confirmation, Mr. and Mrs. Shudu's bodies had been dismembered into 32 pieces. When forensic experts tried to reconstruct the remains, they made a shocking discovery. Mrs. Zhuang's body was missing both her heart and liver. Police searched the entire building but couldn't find the missing organs. However, more urgent than locating the missing body parts was finding the suspect. Based on all available evidence, everything pointed to the son-in-law, Yunhui. Police used the youngest son Wenhui's testimony to reconstruct the sequence of events. Yunhui had likely killed both in-laws before 4 p.m. on the 29th, then left the misleading note on the door. In reality, he was inside the house dismembering the bodies and cleaning the scene. By 10 p.m. that evening, he was still able to calmly receive his brother-in-law and his wife in the living room. If the couple hadn't been so vigilant, they might have met the same fate. Why would a son-in-law commit such a brutal act against his in-laws? Initially, everyone assumed Yunhui must have done it for money, but when police searched the scene, they found $200,000 in cash along with Yunhui's ID and passport still in the house. If money was the motive, why weren't these valuables taken? This puzzle could actually be easily explained. Most likely, when Yunhui realized he had been discovered unexpectedly, he fled in panic without having time to take the money. Yunhui was 26 when he married the eldest daughter of the Zhuang family, Yue Qing. At the time, he was a medical student. When they married, his father-in-law Mr. Shudu was very generous, spending $2 million to buy them an apartment on Zhonghua Road in the Wanhua district as a wedding gift. This shows how satisfied the in-laws were with him initially. However, no one expected that Yunhui would not be content with his situation. While still in medical school, he suddenly became intensely interested in business. As a result, he dropped out of school, fixated on becoming a successful businessman. While the ambition to build wealth from scratch isn't wrong in itself, the problem was that every time Yunhui invested in something, it ended in complete failure. According to close associates, he had never succeeded even once. Although Yunhui's family was relatively well off, they couldn't continue supporting his repeated business failures. When he could no longer rely on resources from his own family, Yunhui turned his attention to his father-in-law. Initially, Mr. and Mrs. Shudu remained generous with their son-in-law, almost always providing money whenever he asked. But gradually they realized he was like a bottomless pit, so they arranged for their daughter and son-in-law to immigrate to Argentina, where their eldest son had already settled. They hoped that in this new environment, Yunhui would finally conduct business seriously and stop wasting money. When he first arrived in Argentina, Yunhui appeared to have changed. Through his brother-in-law's connections, he fortunately secured a position at a slaughterhouse. However, this hope didn't last long. Soon after, he quit this stable job to join a fellow immigrant in investing in an auto body repair shop. The result was disastrous. Within just a few months, all the investment capital had vanished. It wasn't until later that the Zhuang's eldest son discovered that the money Yunhui had invested in the repair shop had actually come from his parents secretly supporting him again. Furious at this revelation, he couldn't help but scold his parents. From that point on, Mr. and Mrs. Shudu finally resolved to cut off all financial support to their son-in-law. Still, the eldest son couldn't feel at ease. He worried that his parents wouldn't be able to resist Yunhui's pleading and pressure. Finally, he suggested having his parents come live with him in Argentina. With him watching over them, at least they could prevent Yunhui from squandering away the family's assets. The elderly couple agreed with this idea and decided to reunite with their eldest son in Argentina. At this point, Yunhui suddenly returned to Taiwan without warning, eagerly helping his in-laws with immigration procedures. Family members believed Yunhui's proactive return to Taiwan was actually targeting his father-in-law's real estate properties in Taipei. He calculated that since the elderly couple would be settling abroad permanently, they would certainly have to sell these properties, so he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. However, from the current outcome, it's clear that Yunhui didn't achieve his goal. That's why during the night of the murder, while sitting with his brother-in-law, he kept complaining about his in-laws' favoritism. After compiling all this background information, the police could establish that the son-in-law's motive was money. They immediately froze all accounts under Mr. Shudu's name to prevent any assets from being transferred. According to police investigation, when Yunhui fled the scene in panic, he was wearing only a tank top and shorts, with no passport or money. Police predicted he couldn't survive on the run for more than a few days. Sure enough, 3 days after the murder, with no money and no connections, Yunhui had no choice but to turn himself in. However, surprisingly, he didn't choose to go to a police station. On the morning of the third day after the murder, around 8 a.m., Yunhui called the Ministry of Justice, identifying himself as the perpetrator of the Hejiang Street murder and requesting to surrender directly to the minister. He explained that the case was connected to a secret Brazilian organization that wanted to destabilize Taiwan. He claimed he was sent by this organization. Because the case was highly confidential, he said he couldn't surrender at a police station, fearing that if the secret leaked, the organization would harm his family. Yunhui revealed he was calling from a public phone booth next to the Taipei First Girls High School. Soon after, the chief prosecutor of the Taipei District Prosecutor's Office and several high-ranking officials quickly arrived at the location and found Yunhui. To avoid media attention, the prosecutors conducted a secret interrogation of Yunhui. During questioning, he claimed he had acted on the organization's orders and mentioned an accomplice named Wang. He stated that this superior Wang was the one who actually killed his in-laws, while he only helped restrain and gag the victims, then assisted with dismembering and bagging the bodies. Yunhui explained that Wang knew his in-laws were wealthy and was aware of his poor relationship with them, so he planned this crime. After success, the organization would take a portion of the money as operational funds. While these statements sound completely absurd to us now, In the political context of that era, the authorities couldn't dismiss them outright, especially when Yunhui mentioned previous terrorist attacks their organization had allegedly carried out in Taiwan, providing extensive details. For example, he mentioned a bombing at a newspaper office next to the Taipei station on April 26, 1983. Though no one died, 12 people were injured. Additionally, 22 minutes before that explosion, an elevator in a building on Section 4 of Zhongxiao Road had also exploded. At the time, both incidents had indeed been classified as terrorist acts. Yunhui claimed all these events were planned by their organization. He even named specific individuals who carried out these incidents, providing detailed accounts of each event. However, after several months of thorough investigation, prosecutors began to realize Yunhui was likely lying. While he could describe these terrorist attacks in detail, these were all headline news stories from that time, not secret information at all. When prosecutors asked him to share information that only organization members would know, or about plans not yet executed, Yunhui could only stammer and provided no answers. Furthermore, the supposed superior named Wang was completely fabricated. Yunhui couldn't provide any full name, address, or age for this person. Finally, it became clear that Yunhui had cleverly exploited the authorities' sensitivity to conspiracy theories to mislead investigators. He knew that just mentioning a secret organization would force the government to investigate thoroughly to catch all involved parties. This tactic could potentially drag the investigation out for years. Nonetheless, the prosecutors finally determined that Yunhui was the sole perpetrator, with money as his simple motive. They formally indicted this inhumane son-in-law. At the initial trial, when faced with intense questioning, Yunhui admitted to killing his in-laws for money. However, he stubbornly clung to his story about the accomplice named Wang, insisting he was forced to participate by a secret organization that needed money. However, this claim was firmly rejected by both sons of the Zhuang family. During the trial, Yunhui requested fingerprint comparisons to prove his story. But forensic experts explained that the fabric bags containing the bodies weren't suitable for collecting clear fingerprints, and all the murder weapons had been cleaned. Moreover, since the defendant had lived in the house, even if fingerprints were found, he could easily explain them away. Given the limited forensic technology of the time and the small fingerprint database available, fingerprint evidence proved useless in this case. Finally, the judge concluded that Yunhui's statements were fabrications meant to justify his actions and were completely unreliable. He was sentenced to death. However, when the case reached the appeals court, there was a dramatic turn. The High Court convicted him of continuous murder with accomplices, though still maintaining the death sentence. The court ruled this way because they believed the crime couldn't have been committed by one person alone, citing three main reasons. The High Court cited three main reasons. First, both elderly victims were of large build, making it nearly impossible for Yunhui to overpower them both alone. Second, the murders occurred during daylight hours. If he had acted alone, the victims would surely have screamed for help, yet neighbors heard nothing. Third, the crime scene had been cleaned exceptionally thoroughly, which seemed impossible for one person to accomplish. Because the appeals court judge leaned toward the multiple perpetrators theory, the prosecutor disagreed with this ruling and appealed. The case was thus sent back to the High Court for retrial. This inadvertently gave Yunhui more time. In the early morning of October 21, 1987, Yunhui took advantage of being released for medical treatment and escaped with two other inmates when the prison guards were inattentive. They used an iron bar to pry off their shackles, then split up and fled in different directions. This gave Yunhui a brief taste of freedom. During the subsequent manhunt, police discovered that Yunhui had a mistress, Mrs. Wu, in Taiwan. Police believed that after escaping, Yunhui would likely seek her help. Following this lead, police went to Mrs. Wu's residence but found she had moved. They left officers to monitor the location, waiting to see if Yunhui would come looking for his mistress. Their patience paid off. Not knowing she had moved, Yunhui arrived only to find police waiting instead of his mistress. To prevent any further unexpected incidents, the Taipei Supreme Court sentenced Yunhui to death on March 4, 1988, with immediate execution. 1 week later, At 5:30 a.m. on March 11th, his life ended at the execution grounds. However, one question still troubled many people. What happened to the missing heart and liver? Initially, all media outlets only reported that the victim was missing a heart and liver. It wasn't until a year later that the press revealed that police had initially returned to the crime scene and taken an inner pot from a rice cooker. As for what was in the pot, official media never disclosed its contents. Yunhui had been singularly focused on success, determined to achieve his dream of wealth. On the surface, this seemed like the same aspiration that most hardworking people share, which isn't wrong in itself. However, in pursuing money and success, we can sometimes unknowingly fall into the trap of deep-seated greed. When pursuit becomes blind obsession, we might forget why we started striving in the first place, whether it was to better care for our family, to fulfill our life's purpose, or merely for fleeting glory and vanity. Finally, I hope that while everyone pursues their career, they'll cherish what truly gives meaning to our lives, the people who stand beside us, supporting and loving us. That way, our life's journey won't just be filled with the coldness of money, but will be rich with love and companionship. And that concludes today's case. What are your thoughts about this case? Share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to not miss other intense cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.